Why did they always laugh at the one thing she couldn't erase? The faded serpent tattoo wrapped around Lena Brooks' forearm had never been meant for decoration. It wasn't stylish. It wasn't pretty. It was old ink, black and worn, the kind that bled slightly into the skin with time until the edges blurred like smoke. But it was hers. And for years it had been more than hers. It had been a mark that bound her to people she could never name, to missions she could never talk about, and to ghosts that visited her long after the gunfire stopped echoing in her dreams. At camp, though, the tattoo had no history. To them, it was a joke, a faded mistake on a quiet woman who turned wrenches instead of heads. "Nice ink, Brooks," a voice had sneered weeks ago, one of the new recruits, barely out of boot camp, his pride still polished from graduation. "Looks like a garage special. Did you lose a bet or something?" The laughter that followed hadn't surprised her. Marines were hard on each other and harder on those who seemed like easy targets. She learned that long ago. What stung wasn't the words. It was the ease with which she let them think it was true, that it was nothing. Just a bad tattoo, just a joke, just a mistake on a woman who fixed engines because she wasn't cut out for anything else. If only they knew. The California sun was punishing that morning. It pressed against the like a weight, turning the rows of Humvees and transport trucks into heat-shimmering monuments of steel and dust. Lena's coveralls clung to her back, damp with sweat. She slid out from under a Humvee, grease streaked across her brow, and reached for a new wrench. Around her, the clang of tools, the hiss of compressors, the bark of orders from sergeants created a rhythm she had come to rely on. A rhythm that was safe, predictable, ordinary. She liked it that way. At 28, she was invisible, reliable, competent. A woman who arrived on time, put her head down, and worked until the job was done. Her fellow mechanics respected her skill. She could diagnose an engine fault by ear before most of them even cracked open the hood. But respect in there was quiet, and the laughter at her tattoo was louder. She let it be. Because Lena knew something they didn't. That attention was dangerous. Too much curiosity could unravel everything, and her survival depended on staying unseen. But hiding came with a price. Every night, lying on her narrow bunk in the enlisted women's quarters, the same images came back. A canyon, lit by muzzle flashes, smoke rising against a starless sky, the weight of a teammate heavier with each step as her own blood mixed with his, the helicopter's shadow overhead, the voice in her ear telling her to keep moving. 7 went into those mountains. 6 came out. 2 died before they ever saw safety. The military had buried it all. The files, the names, the truth. Unit Meridian had never existed, officially. And the survivors had been scattered like ashes, reassigned, silenced, folded into the machinery of the military where their skills could be useful but their secrets contained. That was the deal. Live quietly, stay hidden, don't draw attention. For Lena, that meant camps, wrenches instead of rifles, oil stains instead of blood, and the tattoo, the one thing she couldn't erase, reduced to the punchline of barracks gossip. She had convinced herself it was enough. But then came the inspection. It was late September when Colonel Vincent Nash arrived at. Word of his transfer spread quickly. A career Marine, decorated, with a reputation forged in places most people couldn't point to on a map. It was just another inspection, another officer in crisp uniform walking the line. Lena prepared the way she always did, clean tools, clean work area, answers ready. She expected no more than a nod, maybe a question about schedules. Keep her head down, play the role, move on. But roles never hold forever. She was halfway under the belly of a transport truck, arms deep in the engine bay, when she felt it. That pause, that silence, the subtle shift in the air that only someone trained to read tension would notice. She slid one hand free, wiped grease on her coveralls, and glanced out. Colonel Nash stood there, not moving, not speaking, just staring. At her arm. At the tattoo. The laughter of the younger Marines faded in her memory, replaced by a silence so sharp it cut through the din of The colonel's face had gone still, his eyes fixed, his breath caught between disbelief and memory. "Brooks," he said finally, voice even, but his tone carried something else, something that made her chest tighten. She slid out from under the truck, tools still in her hand, and came to attention before him. Old instincts, automatic. Her gaze lifted briefly, meeting his eyes, and in that instant she knew. He knew. The serpent, the compass. Recognition flickered between them. A signal passed without words. And then, without warning, Colonel Nash shrugged off his jacket. The froze. Soldiers stopped what they were doing. Even Sergeant, who'd been narrating procedures a moment earlier, fell silent. Nash pulled off his undershirt. And there it was. On his shoulder, faded, black, identical, the serpent wrapped around the compass, the mark of meridian. The mechanics around them didn't understand. They just stared, confused, unsettled, whispering. But Lena understood too well. Her secret was no longer hers. Nash's voice dropped, meant for her but loud enough that everyone nearby could hear. "She's not logistics." His eyes never left hers. "She's former Unit Meridian. Only 6 of us made it out alive." The words hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. Heavy, inescapable, final. Her chest tightened, her pulse rising. 2 years of carefully constructed anonymity shattered in a single moment of recognition. For the first time in years, Lena felt exposed. Not because of the tattoo, not because of the jokes, but because someone who bore the same mark had just pulled her back into a world she thought she'd left behind. The colonel dressed slowly, deliberately, reclaiming his uniform as if nothing had happened. Then he looked too, his voice steady, authoritative, absolute. "I need to speak with Brooks privately." No explanation, no room for questions, just an order. And Lena knew the quiet life she had built was gone. What did he mean by "only 6 of us made it out alive"? The words wouldn't leave her. They trailed Lena like a shadow as she followed Colonel Nash across the compound, away from the clang of tools and the smell of oil, away from the world where she had blended in so carefully. Her boots struck the pavement in steady rhythm, but inside her chest, her heartbeat raced with uneven force. Every step felt like crossing a line she wasn't ready to cross. She hadn't looked at him when he gave the order, hadn't let her face betray anything. But the moment his eyes locked on hers, they disappeared. She was back in those mountains, back in the dark, back in the moment where everything ended and began again. Now she walked behind him, silent, keeping her expression flat, her posture obedient. But her thoughts churned. Why now? Why him? Why here? Nash said 6. That meant he knew. That meant he had been there. And if he remembered, then the life she had built here, the quiet, unremarkable mechanic, had just collapsed like a tent pulled down by its stakes. They reached Building 47, a squat structure on the edge of the base most personnel ignored. Administrative offices, briefing rooms, that was the cover. But Lena had been in enough of these places before to recognize what they really were. Rooms designed to hold secrets. Rooms that swallowed voices whole. Nash opened the door without a word and gestured her inside. She stepped through. The air inside was cool, recycled, sterile. The walls were bare, the windows sealed. A single table sat in the center of the room by years of elbows, folders, coffee mugs. On one wall, a discreet box hummed faintly, signal jammers, sweeping for bugs. She knew the type. Nash closed the door behind them. For a moment, he didn't speak. He simply looked at her, the same way he had like he was seeing someone alive who should have been dead. Finally, his voice broke the silence. "I thought you were gone." The words struck harder than any accusation. Lena stayed still, hands clasped behind her back, gaze fixed just over his shoulder, regulation stance, safe, neutral. But her throat tightened. She had prepared herself for this moment for 2 years, and still she wasn't ready. "Officially, I am," she said, The words tasted like metal. The woman you knew doesn't exist anymore. Nash exhaled slowly, sinking into the chair at the table. He looked older now, not just because of the gray hair or the lines in his face. It was the weight in his eyes, the weight of someone who had carried silence too long. Unit Meridian, he said softly, almost like it hurt to say the name aloud. They told us 5, just 5 survivors. No word of you, not a trace. That's the point, she answered. I was meant to disappear. His gaze searched hers. And yet here you are fixing trucks. Her lips twitched in something that wasn't quite a smile. Better trucks than coffins. For a moment neither spoke. The silence was thick, filled with everything neither of them dared say too quickly. Memories pressed at the edges of the room, smoke, gunfire, faces half lost in shadow. Finally Nash leaned forward. Why hide it? Why the charade? Her eyes dropped to the serpent on her arm, the ink that had betrayed her. She ran her thumb over the faded lines as if feeling for answers in the skin. Because being visible gets you killed, she said quietly. Because what we did, who we were, it doesn't belong here. Not anymore. Nash nodded slowly, but his expression was sharp, unreadable. You think that cover will save you. It saved me for 2 years. And now it won't, he countered. Not anymore. The words hung between them like a verdict, and she knew he was right. Something had shifted. Nash's eyes hardened. He reached up, touched his own shoulder, where the ink still lay hidden under his uniform. They're looking for us, he said. Her stomach dropped. Who? Don't know, not yet, but I've been briefed. Questions are being asked in places where no one should even know we existed. Surveillance, patterns, whoever it is, they're closing in. Lena swallowed, the back of her throat dry. For 2 years she had lived with the illusion of safety. The illusion that if she kept her head down, the past would leave her alone. That illusion just shattered. And you, she asked, what's your role in this? He hesitated, just long enough for her to notice. Officially, base commander. Unofficially, his voice dropped lower. They gave me another job to watch, to keep track of what's left of Meridian, to make sure we adjusted. She let out a bitter laugh, quiet and sharp. House arrest with a paycheck, that's all this was. He didn't deny it. Her chest tightened. So what now? Do they erase us, tie up loose ends? His jaw flexed. Maybe, maybe not, but whoever's hunting us doesn't care about official orders, and they're moving fast. The silence stretched. Lena's pulse hammered. Memories stirred of the team, of the 6 who had survived, of the 2 who hadn't, of the way the unit had been scattered like shards of broken glass across the military. If someone was piecing those shards back together, it could only mean one thing. They're coming, she whispered. Nash's eyes locked on hers. And when they do, your cover won't matter. Her breath slowed, steadied. Something inside her shifted, the mechanic receding, the operative stirring. She felt it in her posture, in the way her eyes began scanning the room, cataloging exits, threats, options. For 2 years she had been pretending she was just grease and tools, pretending she had buried the instincts that once kept her alive. But instincts don't die, they wait. And now they were awake again. She leaned forward, meeting Nash's gaze directly for the first time. Tell me everything. That was how it began, not with orders, not with missions, not even with weapons, but with 2 people marked by the same ink, realizing that the past had finally caught up with them. And for Lena Brooks, the quiet, ordinary mechanic, there was no turning back. Why was the man in civilian clothes watching her? Lena sat in the far corner of the cafeteria, tray balanced in front of her, posture casual. To anyone else, she was just another mechanic on her lunch break, pushing food around her plate while the noise of Marines filled the room, boots scuffing tile, laughter at a nearby table, trays slamming into racks. Ordinary, forgettable. But her instincts told a different story. The man sat 3 tables over, too cleanly dressed for a contractor, too disciplined for a casual visitor. His khakis had a pressed crease. His hair was cut just a little too short. He ate slowly, deliberately, not because he was hungry but because it gave him a reason to stay. And his eyes, they never quite left her. He was good, subtle, watching her without watching her, using reflective surfaces, timing his movements with precision. To anyone else he was invisible, to Lena he was obvious. Once she might have ignored it. Once she might have forced herself to believe she was imagining it. But after Nash's words, after the truth about Meridian had resurfaced, she knew better. They weren't rumors, someone really was looking. And now they had found her. She lifted her fork, chewing slowly, keeping her own expression blank. Inside, her body tensed, every nerve alive. She remembered the drills, the counter-surveillance techniques beaten into her during training. Don't break cover. Don't let them know you see them. Observe first. Confirm. Then decide. Her eyes flicked briefly to the far wall, to the glass of a vending machine. In its reflection, she caught him again, the way his wrist shifted, fingers brushing the side of his face, lips moving faintly. A mic. A call. He wasn't alone. That detail tightened the knot in her chest. This wasn't some curious stranger. This was coordinated, watched. And she was the target. Finishing her food, she rose with deliberate calm. She dumped her tray, moved toward the exit, her steps unhurried. Behind her, the man didn't follow right away. But just before she pushed through the doors, she caught a glimpse, his head tilted, his lips close to his hand again, speaking into a device, reporting. She walked into sunlight, the California heat striking her face. Her pulse beat hard in her neck. Nash had been right. The past wasn't just catching up, it was here. She didn't go straight back to that would be predictable. Instead, she angled through a different path, past supply depots, past barracks, using the flow of bodies as cover. Each reflective surface she passed, a window, a parked Humvee, the gloss of a door, became her ally. Each glance gave her fragments of the truth. Yes, she was being followed. Not closely, not clumsily, but there. One man shadowing her, another further back, his reflection caught in a glass door as she passed. At least 2, maybe more. And she knew what that meant. If they had details on her movements, her cover was gone. Her anonymity was compromised. Her hands curled into fists. 2 years of silence, undone in a single afternoon. When she reached she schooled her expression, let her breathing settle. She had to appear normal, unshaken. But her body buzzed with alertness, with the cold familiarity of danger. Sergeant was waiting, clipboard in hand, expression puzzled. "Brooks," he said, "Colonel Nash wants to see you, urgently." Her pulse jumped. Leaned closer, lowering his voice. "He said to tell you it's about the new maintenance procedures." A code, a signal. She nodded, forcing a casual tone. Understood. As she walked away, her mind sharpened. Nash knew something. Maybe he had picked up the same signs she had, or maybe intelligence had intercepted something bigger. Either way, the game had changed. Nash's office was dim when she entered, blinds drawn, door shut quickly behind her. He stood by his desk, jacket off, sleeves rolled, a look on his face that told her everything before he even spoke. "We have a problem," he said flatly. She closed the door. "I noticed." He studied her, gauging. "You saw them." In the cafeteria, one watching, another trailing, professional but not perfect. They wanted me to notice just enough. Nash nodded grimly. "That matches what we intercepted this morning. Encrypted chatter. Someone's compiled profiles, detailed ones on every Meridian survivor. Assignments, covers, habits. They've been distributed to operational teams." Her chest tightened. Operational teams for what? His jaw flexed. "We don't know, but the language suggests direct action. Elimination." The word didn't need to be spoken. It hung between them like smoke. Lena felt her pulse steady, slowing into something cold and sharp. Fear threatened at the edges, but training pressed it down. She had been here before, the edge of something dangerous, where survival depended not on panic but precision. "My cover blown," she said. "Yes. And the others?" "Harper's at Fort, Jackson's in Germany. They've been compromised too. Surveillance already confirmed near Harper's place this morning. Jackson's routine mapped for days." She exhaled slowly. Every name carried weight. Friends, family once, fragments of a unit that had trusted each other with everything, and now each was a target. Her mind spun. Who had the resources? Who had the motivation? Foreign intelligence. Revenge from enemies they had crossed. Or worse, someone inside their own government deciding Meridian survivors were liabilities best erased. The last thought cut deeper than the rest. Nash broke the silence. "We're authorized to protect ourselves. For now, that means preparation. But authorization for offensive measures may come soon. Hours, not days." Her gaze sharpened, back to operational status. He studied her, if it comes to that. For 2 years she had buried the operative inside her, smothered instincts, pretended. But now, hearing those words, something inside her stirred fully awake. The mechanic was gone. The soldier, the operative, the survivor, she was back. And there was no turning away. That night in her bunk, Lena couldn't sleep. The ceiling above her blurred in the darkness. Every creak of the building, every muffled footstep outside set her nerves alight. She lay still, but her mind moved relentlessly. She thought of the serpent inked into her skin, mocked by recruits, dismissed by strangers. They had called it ugly, meaningless. They had laughed. But now the truth of it burned. The serpent wasn't decoration. It was a signal, a warning, a cycle that never truly ended. And now the cycle was beginning again. Why did the dead always come back at night? Lena sat in the dimly lit operations room, Building 47's basement sealed from the world above. The walls hummed faintly with electronic shielding, monitors glowed with fragments of intercepted data, and Nash's voice carried across the table in a low, steady tone. He laid out the files with precision, thick, manila folders stamped with classifications that didn't officially exist. Each one a profile. Each one a life reduced to patterns of movements, addresses, photographs clipped from surveillance. 6 survivors, scattered, tracked. Harper, intelligence analyst, Fort Jackson, logistics unit, Germany, and now Lena, mechanic. Their covers were gone. Nash tapped the papers with his finger. Whoever compiled this knows more than they should. Daily routines, housing layouts, even habits. Someone is either inside our system, or they've stolen access to something they never should have touched. Lena flipped through one file, her fingers tightening. Every detail about her life for the past 2 years stared back at her. The time she left her quarters each morning, the path she usually walked, the corner of the cafeteria where she liked to sit, even the kind of coffee she bought on Fridays from the vending machine near the supply building. She shut the folder hard. This isn't surveillance. This is a blueprint for an ambush. Nash's jaw flexed, his gray eyes hard. Exactly, which is why we can't just wait, we prepare. She leaned back, forcing a slow breath. Her instincts screamed agreement, but another part of her resisted. The part that had lived in the quiet, the part that remembered how it ended last time. Because the dead never stayed buried. And in the silence of the operations room, they stirred again. The canyon walls had glowed with fire. It was night, but flames painted the world in jagged orange. Smoke clawed at her lungs as Lena ran, boots slipping on loose shale, her shoulder screaming under the weight of Walker, blood soaking through his uniform, heavier with each step. "Leave me," he gasped, his voice broken. "Shut up," she hissed, dragging him forward. The others were ahead, shadows moving against shadows, returning fire into darkness where muzzle flashes flared like lightning. The mission had already gone to hell. Promises broken, support that never came, maps that lied. They were supposed to move unseen. Instead, they were ambushed. 7 went in. 6 came out. But not all survived extraction. Lena still heard the sound of scream when the blast took him. Still saw the spray of sparks as the helicopter lifted under fire. Still felt Walker's body go limp as she stumbled forward, refusing to let go until someone tore him from her arms. That night had carved itself into her bones. The smell of burning fuel, the weight of betrayal, the silence that followed when higher command buried it under the label of training accident. Meridian was dead, officially, and the survivors scattered like ghosts. Her eyes blinked open, the memory retreating as Nash's voice cut through. "You're not listening." She realized her hand had tightened into a fist against the table. "I heard you," she said quietly. "Preparation, proactive measures, offensive action if necessary." Nash studied her, his gaze sharp, measuring. "But your head is somewhere else." She exhaled, a bitter edge in her tone. "The last time we trusted preparation, 2 of ours didn't come home." Silence followed, heavy but not empty, shared, because his eyes told her he remembered too. Nash leaned forward, his voice dropping low. "And you carried one of them on your back until you collapsed at the bird. Don't think I don't remember that." Her throat tightened. She didn't want gratitude. She didn't want recognition. What she wanted was impossible. She wanted it to not have happened at all. Instead, she forced her jaw to set. "So tell me, what's the play?" He opened another folder, spreading satellite images across the table. Circles marked routes, arrows noted patterns. "We treat this as hostile reconnaissance leading to capture or elimination. We build redundancies, safe houses, extraction routes, and if we get authorization, we strike first." He nodded. The words steadied her in a way that scared her. For 2 years, she had pretended the serpent on her arm was just ink. Now, hearing this plan, she felt it coil alive again. Nash slid another document toward her, sealed, red-striped. "These are preliminary parameters, classified beyond anything you've seen since Meridian. Once you read them, you're back in. No half measures." Her hand hovered over it, a choice, or the illusion of one. She thought of the cafeteria, the watcher with 2 perfect clothes, the second shadow on her walk back. She thought of Harper and Jackson, targets on their backs just like her. And she thought of Walker, of. Her fingers closed on the envelope. She broke the seal. Inside, dense language laid out the truth, profiles compiled by someone with access to restricted databases, evidence of coordination across multiple countries, teams already in place. Whoever was behind this wasn't experimenting. They were executing. Lena closed the file slowly, her pulse steady but her mind racing. She looked at Nash. "We're not ghosts anymore." His expression hardened. "No, we're bait, and the only way we live through this is if we turn the hunt around." For the first time in years, she felt the cold clarity of mission creep back into her veins. The mechanic was gone. The operative was awake. That night, lying in her bunk, Lena didn't dream. She didn't need to. The memories came whether she slept or not. Walker's weight, scream, the serpent burning black against her arm as if the ink itself refused to fade. She rolled her sleeve up, tracing it with her fingertip. The lines blurred with age, but the meaning had only sharpened. A serpent consuming its own tail, wrapped around a compass. Endless return, no escape. She whispered to herself, a voice almost foreign after years of silence. Full circle. And she knew. There would be no going back. How long could she pretend not to see them? The next morning, Lena moved through the base with deliberate calm. To anyone else, she looked unchanged, coveralls, grease smudges, tool bag slung across her shoulder. A mechanic reporting for duty, no different from the day before. but inside her body thrummed with awareness. Every corner, every shadow, every face. The serpent on her arm burned like a reminder. Stay alert. In this she bent over an engine, hands steady, movements practiced. Around her, tools clinked, recruits joked, sergeant barked corrections. Routine. Normal. But routine was exactly what made her vulnerable. Patterns were how hunters closed in. She tested herself. She lifted her head at odd intervals, not when someone would expect. She moved between vehicles out of sequence, circling back, changing her rhythm. And each time she felt it, the subtle prickle of eyes tracking her. Different faces, different positions, but the same gaze. They weren't sloppy, but they weren't perfect either. Whoever they weren't Marines stationed here. They blended well enough to fool most, not her. Nash had warned her, "We're bait," and she was starting to believe it. That afternoon, Nash called her into his office again. He stood by the window, blinds angled so no one could see in. His voice was quiet, tight. There inside the wire. She didn't ask how he knew, she only nodded. "I've been feeding false trails," he continued. "Administrative paperwork, supposed meetings. They've bitten every time. Someone is tracking me the same way they're tracking you." She leaned against the desk, arms folded. "So what's our move?" He met her eyes, gray and hard. "We confirm, we push. We see how close they're willing to get." Her pulse quickened. It wasn't fear. It was anticipation. A familiar current she hadn't felt in years. He handed her a folded paper, coordinates, a time. "Walk there tomorrow, routine pace. Don't vary, we'll see who follows." She tucked the paper into her sleeve. "And if they make a move." His voice sharpened. "Then you remind them what Meridian was trained to do." The next day was bright, the California sun unrelenting as Lena set out along the route Nash had chosen. Her boots struck pavement in steady rhythm, tool bag over her shoulder, expression bored, casual. She looked like every other enlisted Marine on base. But every nerve in her body was awake. She passed the supply building. A shadow shifted against the wall. She didn't turn her head, just a glimpse in the edge of her vision. Civilian clothes, wrong for the environment. She passed the barracks. A figure sat on the steps, pretending to smoke, but the lighter never flicked. His eyes flicked instead to her. By the time she neared the designated point, a maintenance shed at the edge of the perimeter, she counted at least 3. Her chest tightened, not paranoia, confirmation. She stepped inside the shed, air heavy with dust and motor oil. The door creaked behind her. She set her bag down slowly, her hand brushing the wrench inside. Her breathing was steady, her heartbeat sharp. Then it came, the faint scrape of boots outside. They were close, too close. She tightened her grip on the wrench. The door opened. A man stepped in civilian clothes again, but posture too precise. His eyes swept the shed, then locked on her. For a moment, they just stared at each other. "Need something?" she asked, voice even, disinterested. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes. "Brooks, right, mechanic." Her chest coiled. The way he said her name wasn't casual, it was deliberate. She tilted her head. "You've got the wrong person." "Don't think so," he said softly. His hand shifted not to a weapon but to his pocket. Phone, recording, transmitting. Her instincts screamed. She stepped closer, wrench in hand, her eyes never leaving his. "You're on the wrong base, civilian." For the first time his expression flickered, just for a second, but it was enough. He backed a step, eyes narrowing. Then he gave her that faint, false smile again. "See you around, Brooks." He turned and walked out. Her grip on the wrench eased, but her chest still burned with adrenaline. She exhaled slowly, steadying herself. They weren't just watching, they were probing, testing. And that meant the real move was coming. That night she met Nash again in the secure room. He listened as she recounted the encounter, his jaw tightening with each detail. "They're getting bolder," she said. He nodded. which means the timeline's accelerating. We won't have the luxury of waiting much longer. She leaned forward, elbows on the table. So what's the plan? He studied her, silent for a moment. Then his voice dropped. We go offensive. Not officially, not yet, but we need to know who they are, why they're here, and we can't do that by hiding in offices. Her pulse steadied into something cold, sharp, familiar. It wasn't fear, it wasn't dread. It was readiness. She looked down at the serpent on her arm, faded ink catching the fluorescent light. They had mocked it, laughed at it, called it meaningless. But here now, it was the only thing that told the truth. The cycle had begun again. And this time, she wouldn't run from it. Why did Harper always feel like someone was standing just outside her door? The apartment was quiet, too quiet. The walls were thin. Usually she could hear the muffled rhythm of boots on the stairs, a neighbor's television humming through plaster, or the faint sound of cadences being shouted from training fields not far away. Tonight, the silence pressed like a weight. Harper sat at her desk, laptop open, light blue from the screen washing her face. Officially, she was an intelligence analyst, assigned to sift through satellite imagery and electronic chatter at Fort. Unofficially, she was something that didn't exist anymore. Her coffee had gone cold an hour ago. She rubbed her temples, eyes flicking between the report on her screen and the reflection in the darkened window. A habit she couldn't kill, scanning the glass for movement, shadows, anything out of place. And tonight, something was out of place. A van parked across the street. White, plain, unmarked. Too ordinary in a way that wasn't ordinary at all. It had been there when she got home, still there now. Her pulse quickened. She reached for her phone, thumb hovering over the call button. Not 911. No, not them. If this was what she thought it was, local police wouldn't understand, and maybe wouldn't be allowed to respond. She scrolled instead to a secure contact list. Numbers only a handful of people in the country knew. Numbers she hadn't touched in 2 years. Her hand hesitated. Calling would mean admitting the quiet life she'd built was over, that the ghosts had caught up. A movement drew her eye back to the window. The driver's side door of the van opened. A man stepped out. Civilian clothes, baseball cap. He leaned casually against the side, phone to his ear. But Harper's instincts, the instincts she had spent years burying under office hours and data streams, told her everything she needed. He wasn't on the phone. He was watching. Her chest tightened. Across the country, in the basement room Nash's voice cut through the low hum of machines. They're moving faster than expected. Harper's cover is blown. Lena's head snapped up from the file she was reading. What? Intercepted chatter this morning, Nash said, sliding a document toward her. Teams already in place at Fort. Surveillance confirmed at her residence. Same profile pattern as yours. Lena's stomach dropped. The cafeteria, the man in the shed, it wasn't just her. It wasn't paranoia. It was coordinated, systematic. How long before they act? She asked. Nash's eyes were grim. Could be hours, could be less. She leaned back, pulse hard, breath sharp. For 2 years she had told herself the past was dead, that the unit was gone, that Harper, Jackson, the others, they were ghosts like her, living small, safe lives. Now she knew. The ghosts weren't safe. They were being hunted. Back at Fort, Harper moved through her apartment with quiet, controlled efficiency. The analyst mask had slipped. The operative inside her had returned, precise and sharp. She checked locks. She checked escape routes. The van outside hadn't moved. The man leaned against it, head down, still pretending to scroll his phone. But Harper knew enough about counter-surveillance to recognize the pattern. He was watching the building, watching her window. She opened the closet, pulled down a bag she hadn't touched in years. Officially, it was just storage, camping gear, a relic of her younger days. But inside, neatly packed, was a kit she had promised herself never to use again. A sidearm broken down and wrapped in cloth, ammunition sealed tight, tools, fake IDs. Her hands didn't tremble as she reassembled the weapon. They moved with old precision, muscle memory. She had tried to bury this part of herself, tried to be normal, to be safe, but she wasn't safe anymore. The serpent ink on her shoulder burned like a brand she couldn't erase. At Nash and Lena studied a live feed from an encrypted channel. Harper's apartment building appeared in grainy black and white. The van was visible, parked across the street. Lena's breath caught. She knows. Yes, Nash said. His voice carried something close to pride and something closer to dread. She always did. They watched as Harper killed the lights in her apartment. Her silhouette crossed the window once, then disappeared. Then on the street below, a second figure joined the first. Two, Nash muttered. Not just surveillance anymore, Lena said. They're positioning. Nash didn't answer. He didn't need to. They both knew what came next. In the dark of her apartment, Harper knelt by the window, pistol steady in her hand, breath controlled. She didn't want this. She had sworn she would never pick up a weapon again, but choice had been stripped away the moment the van pulled up outside. She watched them through the blinds. One leaned against the van, the other moved toward the building. Her pulse slowed, not from calm but from readiness. The cycle had come for her too. Lena clenched her fists, unable to look away from the screen. "Do we move?" she asked. Nash shook his head. "Not yet, no authorization, no orders." Lena's voice sharpened. "Orders, she's exposed, they'll kill her." Nash's jaw tightened, but his eyes stayed on the feed. "And if we move without clearance, they'll shut us down before we can do anything." Her chest burned. Every instinct screamed to act, to do something, to protect what was left of the unit. But the cold, merciless reality of chains of command pressed down. Sometimes waiting was the only move. But waiting could also mean death. Across the country, Harper exhaled slowly, the weight of the pistol steady in her hands. The second man reached the door to her building. She raised the weapon. The serpent on her shoulder seemed to come alive. The cycle had returned, and there was no hiding from it now. What happens when the past knocks on your front door? Harper crouched in the dark, pistol steady in her hands, every nerve alive. The blinds were drawn tight, but through the narrow slats she could see him. The second man. He was crossing the street, closing in on her building with the patience of someone who had done this before. His stride was casual, but his eyes flicked, scanning, measuring. This wasn't reconnaissance anymore. This was approach. Her breath slowed, her heart didn't. She thought of the last 2 years, of all the quiet nights she'd forced herself to believe were safety. She thought of the desk job, the coffee mugs, the harmless conversations with who would never know what she had been. She thought of the promise she'd made herself, never again. And now here she was, weapon in hand, waiting for someone trained, armed, and ordered to erase her. The serpent on her shoulder burned like truth. Across the country, in its basement, Lena leaned forward over the monitor. The grainy black and white feed showed the man at Harper's door. Her fists clenched. "Do something," she whispered. Nash's voice was tight. "She will." "You don't get it," Lena snapped, turning to him. "That Harper, she's not just intel, she's Meridian." Nash's gray eyes flicked to her, sharp but unreadable. "I know who she is." On the screen, the second man reached the entryway. The first stayed at the van, posture casual but gaze fixed. Two-man team, standard, one enters, one covers. Lena's breath came shallow, her chest tightened with memory. This was Meridian's world. This was what they were trained to do, but now they were the hunted. Harper heard the door downstairs creak open, the faint echo of footsteps on the stairwell, deliberate, too deliberate. She steadied her grip on the pistol, the cold metal pressing comfort into her palms. The first step on the landing. She counted breaths, 1, 2, 3. The second step. She moved silently across the room, body low, weapon trained at the entry. Her eyes flicked across reflective surfaces, the microwave door, the dark glass of her computer screen, tracking angles. The third step. Her finger curled against the trigger. She whispered under her breath, "Not again." The shadow appeared in the crack beneath her door. Then, with a suddenness that snapped the silence in half, the lock rattled. A tool slipped in, the faint scrape of metal on metal. They weren't knocking. They were coming in. Lena surged to her feet. "That's it, he's breaching." Nash grabbed her arm, holding her back. "We don't move without authorization." She wrenched free, eyes blazing. "She's not authorization, she's one of us." For a moment Nash's control cracked. His jaw flexed, his eyes hard, but his body stayed still. He was bound, they both were. On the screen the door gave way. The shadow stepped inside. Lena's stomach dropped. "Come on, Harper." Inside the apartment the door swung open an inch. A man slipped through, pistol low in his hand, flashlight clipped to the barrel. The beam cut across the floor. Harper pressed into the corner, breathing through her teeth, steady, waiting. The beam swept closer. Her heart slowed into silence. When the light reached her, she moved. One shot, low, controlled. The man grunted, dropped to one knee, weapon clattering. Harper didn't hesitate. She fired again, chest, then once more, clean, final. The man crumpled. Her ears rang, but training silence panic. She pivoted, checked angles, swept the room. The second man outside, he'd heard. She had seconds. On the monitor, Lena gasped as the first figure fell inside the apartment. Her chest flooded with relief, then fear. "The other one's coming," she muttered. Nash's jaw tightened. "Watch." The figure at the van snapped upright, phone pressed to his ear. Then he drew his weapon and moved toward the building. Lena slammed her fist against the table. "She can't take two alone." Nash didn't look at her. His voice was grim. "She doesn't have a choice." Harper darted across the room, reloading smoothly. Her breath came sharp, but her hands were steady. She crouched by the window, peering through the blinds. The second man was already at the entrance. No time, no exit. Her eyes flicked to the fire escape. Two exposed, the back stairwell blocked. Only one option left. She braced against the wall, pistol aimed at the door, body taut as a bowstring. Her heart whispered the same truth Lena had felt days ago. The cover was gone. The cycle had returned. The serpent never let go. The second man breached fast, door kicked, weapon up, light cutting the dark. Harper fired first. The shot cracked the silence, catching him in the shoulder. He staggered but fired back. Plaster burst near her head, shards raining. She rolled, came up firing again. Another round, center mass. He dropped hard, weapon skidding across the floor. For a moment, silence returned. The acrid smell of gunpowder hung heavy. Her chest heaved, but her grip didn't falter. She moved to the second man, nudged his weapon away with her boot, checked pulse. Gone. She exhaled slowly, lowering the pistol. Her apartment was destroyed, her cover obliterated. But she was alive. For now. Lena stared at the monitor, chest rising and falling fast. "She did it," she whispered. Relief off fear tangled in one breath. Nash's face was grim. "For tonight, but now she's burned, they'll send more, and next time they won't underestimate her." Lena's fists tightened. "Then we don't wait for next time." Nash finally looked at her, eyes hard, calculating. And in that moment, Lena knew. Meridian wasn't dead. It was waking. What does it mean to survive, when survival only brings you back to the fight you thought you escaped? Lena stared at the screen long after it went black. The grainy feed of Harper's apartment had cut out, the signal lost once the gunfire stopped. But the images stayed in her mind. Harper crouched in the dark, the pistol flashing, the first man collapsing, the second one dropping hard against the wall. Alive for now. But Lena knew better than most. Survival was only a pause, a breath between storms. She rubbed her forearm, the serpent's ink pressing against her skin. A cycle, always returning. Behind her, Nash paced, phone pressed to his ear, his voice clipped and precise as he reported. His words were calm, official, but his eyes carried the same truth Lena felt in her bones. This wasn't isolated anymore. It was a campaign. And the campaign had only begun. Hours later, Lena stepped out into the night air, the base quiet, the sky cloudless above. She walked toward the edge of where the hum of generators gave way to silence. Her thoughts spun, fragments of past and present colliding. Walker's weight in her arms, scream in the canyon, Harper firing into the dark, Nash's grim eyes above a stack of files stamped with lies. For 2 years she had tried to silence it, tried to bury the operative under grease and engines, under laughter in cafeterias, under the small rituals of ordinary life. But ordinary had burned away. And all that remained was Meridian. The next morning, the survivors were already moving. Harper had vanished from Fort, slipping out under the cover of chaos, leaving behind only blood and a burned identity. Jackson was on the move from Germany, a coded message reaching Nash before his secure line went dark. The pattern was the same, surveillance tightening, approach imminent. And Lena was no longer pretending. In the secure room, she sat across from Nash, the files between them. No ranks, no covers, no lies, just the truth. "We can't run forever," she said softly. Nash nodded. "No, we stop running." Harper's voice crackled faintly over a secure channel patched through the speakers. "They've already marked us. There's no hiding. Either we stay scattered and die one by one, or we bring it back together." The room fell silent. Bring it back together. Meridian. The word wasn't spoken. It didn't need to be. That night, Lena found herself alone in her quarters, packing. Not because she had orders, not because someone had told her to move, but because instinct screamed louder than orders ever could. She slid her sidearm into its holster, checked ammunition, tucked spare magazines into her bag. Her hands were steady, too steady. She caught her reflection in the mirror. The mechanic's coveralls were gone. She wore something simpler, stripped down, black fatigues, plain, functional. She barely recognized herself. But when her eyes fell to the tattoo on her arm, she understood. She had never left. At dawn they gathered. Not all of them, never all. Too many were gone, buried under stone or silence, but enough. Harper, her hair tied back, eyes sharp but shadowed with exhaustion. Jackson, broad-shouldered, his face harder than Lena remembered, but his presence steady. Nash, silent as ever, carrying the weight of command he hadn't asked for but never put down. They didn't embrace, they didn't celebrate, they didn't even speak much. But when their eyes met, there was no need. The cycle had pulled them back together. The first operation was small. A probe. A test. Not the kind of thing that would make headlines or fill reports. Just 4 shadows moving through the night, slipping into a warehouse outside San, where intel suggested their hunters had staged equipment. Inside they found maps, profiles, weapons, and photographs of themselves. Lena stared at her own face, printed and pinned to a board, red ink circling her routines, her roots, her weak points. The serpent tattoo, zoomed in and marked with notes she couldn't read. Mocked, dismissed, understood only by her. But studied obsessively. Her chest burned as she tore the photo down. They left the warehouse in silence, the city lights blinking in the distance. The evidence was real, the threat undeniable. No more pretending. As they drove back, Lena sat in the back seat of the unmarked vehicle, her eyes fixed on the horizon. The road stretched ahead, dark and endless. She thought of the girl who had first inked the serpent on her arm years ago, too young to know what it meant, too stubborn to explain. They had laughed at it, mocked it, called it foolish. But the serpent wasn't for them, it was for her. It was a reminder that survival wasn't about running. It was about return. Always return. The car rolled to a stop at a checkpoint. Nash lowered his window, words exchanged quietly with a guard, clearance given. The gate lifted. Lena sat in silence, her mind far from the present. She thought of Walker, of the two men Harper had left on the floor of her apartment, of the faces in those files. And she realized something. Survival wasn't the victory. Dignity was. And dignity didn't shout. It didn't demand recognition. It simply acted. The night closed around them, the car disappearing down the road, four shadows carrying the weight of ghosts and the burden of survival. The serpent had begun its cycle again, and none of them knew where it would end. But they were together, and sometimes that was enough.